I'm really, really pleased to have this panel with us today and to have you in our attendance. This is a program we've called Seizing the Moment Against Racism, What Allies Can Do. We're really honored to have this remarkable panel of remarkable leaders with us today to guide us through this conversation and to have all of you in the audience. One last reminder, we'd love to hear who you are. Going to chat, select all panelists and attendees, and let us know who you are. But we're going to get started right away because I think this is an important conversation. I want to make sure we have lots of time to take up, to hear from everybody. One note, Tali Golan from TripAdvisor is not able to attend today. She's off getting her vaccine shot, and we all know that's the most important thing we all need to do at this very moment. So we're sorry we won't have Tali, but really happy to have everyone else. I'd like to introduce the panel. And I'm going to start with by welcoming Liz Cheng, who is someone that actually I worked with Liz just before I started my work at the Chamber when we worked at the World Channel on a couple of programs, and really delighted to have Liz here. Liz is the general manager of TV for GBH's 7 local channels, as well as the World Channel. And before GBH, Liz worked right down the street at Channel 5, where she was in charge of programming at WCVB TV Channel 5. We also have with us Michael Curry. Michael was Joe Biden's was a guest at Joe Biden's speech the other night, but he's the president and CEO of the Mass League of Community Health Centers, representing 52 health centers serving more than 1 million residents across the state. He's a member of Governor Baker's COVID-19 advisory group. He's past president of the Boston branch of the NAACP, and he sits on the NAACP's National Board of Directors. Michael, appreciate having you with us today. Thank you. The Colette Phillips, person that everybody knows here in the Chamber and everybody knows in Massachusetts. She's the president of Colette Phillips Communications, strategic public relations and diversity consulting firm. She's the founder of Get Konnected. She was our partner, the Chamber's partner, in creating our list of the 50 most influential business leaders of color in the Western suburbs. And she sits on the Chamber's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And finally, last but not least, Eneida M is the founding partner of Roman Law and co-founder of Amplify Latinx. She co-designed Amplify Latinx with the intention of building leadership and representation and economic powers for Latinos across all sectors. Really, really pleased to have all of you with us today. And want to get started. I know that one of our goals here today, and based on feedback we've heard from the people who've registered, is they want some good practical, pragmatic tips and ideas about how to deal with their workplace, both as an employer, as an employee, as a customer. But I think we need to begin a little bit talking about the concept of allyship and talking about privilege and how those things interact and really what it means, so we're clear on what the challenges is. And I wanted to start with Eneida, if I could. If you could tell us a little bit, give us a sense of what does privilege mean? What does it look like? And why is it really important that we understand that before we get anywhere further in this conversation?
Thank you so much, Greg, and welcome everybody. Good morning. So as you stated, in this context, we are addressing the issue of privilege with a different lens, because if we look at the dictionary, the definition in the Oxford Dictionary, and I'm going to read it, right? It says it's a special advantage available to a particular person or group. That is the dictionary definition. In this context, we're focusing on privilege as a situation where your race, your skin color, or maybe your language ability impacts how you're treated and or how you're perceived. So that is the context that we will be referring to privilege in this conversation.
Great, thank you. And Colette, can you maybe expand a little bit on that? What's does privilege mean? How do we need to understand that? And you're on mute, my friend.
Unmute myself. Privilege doesn't mean that as a white person that you may not have had a tough life growing up. When people say privilege or white privilege, what they're referring to is your skin color is not one of the things that is negatively affecting your ability to move ahead. you don't get stopped by the police. If you think about privilege, the best display of privilege that I have seen was January 6th at the insurrection at the Capitol. If the people who were breaching our Capitol were members of Black Lives Matter, we would have had a bloodbath there. Just envision that. So that in itself was a visual, impactful look up close and personal of what white privilege entails.
And to build on what Eneida and Colette say, and to take it more in personal terms, it's a privilege not to have to worry about when you leave your house that something might happen to you. It's a privilege to know that when you go to work, that people are valuing who you are and your work for what it is, and not because they think that you're, low, that their expectations you're not reaching, and that maybe you're not really part of the group. It's a privilege to know that when you're walking on the street, that you don't have to worry that people are locking their doors of their cars as you're walking by, or that if you're in a store shopping, that people aren't following you around thinking that you might steal something. It's a privilege not to have to worry about these things that, that BIPOC people have to worry about all the time. I was telling somebody the other day, and this is a very personal story, that, we all know that perhaps not the safest thing if you're a woman and you're on the subway and you're riding around at night, that maybe that's not the safest thing. But one would never think that one's own neighborhood would be a problem. And that, and this is even to take it even more personally. Yesterday, I was walking the dog at 7:30 in the morning, and I, was listening to NPR, of course, and walking along, and somebody was beeping their horn at me. And I looked over, and I didn't know this person. It was a white man in a truck, and he very aggressively said to me, "How are you doing?" And I said, "I'm fine." And I was nervous for that second, because I thought, where is this going? There's nobody around. There's just me. And I said, "Well, good to see you. Thank you." And I just kind of went on my way. And I'd have to say, before COVID, I wouldn't be nervous about this. I wouldn't be nervous that 2 blocks from my house, somebody would be accosting me on the street, maybe asking me directions or something like that. And it's a privilege not to have to worry about that.
Yeah. Michael, you want to weigh in before we move on to the?
Yeah, one, credit to the Newton Needham Chamber of Commerce just for having this conversation. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. And I'm going to tell you, in the legal profession, we have this term called second seating, when there's a primary lawyer and then a secondary. I'm the 4th lawyer in this case, because you have 3 phenomenal panelists, and I could just listen to them for this entire segment. The only thing I would add to that would be this. None of this is new. And I think we'd like to believe we got here and it just sort of happened last year with the murder of George Floyd. And now none of this is new. So, privilege, I like to put privilege, Colette, into the term of power, right? This is about power. Men could have privilege. So when people ask me, do you have male privilege? I don't shy away from that. I'm not offended by that. Of course we do. You couldn't have lived in a society that has relegated women to second-class status and denied them rights and benefits and resources. And it didn't change overnight. We're still fighting that fight today. So me as a man embraces the notion that I inherit privilege as a man, and that my job for the rest of my life is to sort of peel that onion and figure out where I'm taking advantage of that privilege, and where I can upset sort of the systems that have created that privilege for me over women. Race is no different. If you know the history of this country, when we were just talking a second ago, we were listing out sort of examples of privilege, I was sort of flashing in my mind that when I think about getting on an elevator as a tall Black man, and I have to sort of subvert myself or make myself less threatening to a group of white women on an elevator, how many white men have ever thought about that? Right? How many white men have felt because of race that you didn't want people to be afraid of you, right? So this is George Floyd, big Black man billed as a superhero. This is Crispus Attucks during the Boston Massacre, who they tried him And John Adams argued that the reason that they shot Crispus Attucks was because he was a 6'2" Black man. He was threatening. This is Birth of a Nation in 1915, that Black men are threatening and they're a threat. I carry the weight of that every elevator, every street corner, every conference room that I walk in, whether I know it or not. And I think that is the privilege we're talking about. If you're a white man or a white woman, and you don't come from that experience and you don't have that historical context, it won't make sense to you. So it's about power. When you have that power, you may not know you have it. You may not have sought that power out, but you inherit that power. And what you do with it matters. How you dismantle that, the inequities of that power matters.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I think so. I'm the white guy here on the panel, and I did take a look at the people who registered in advance, and I know a lot of people who registered, and a lot of us are those folks who enjoy privilege that the 4 of our panelists may not. Help us understand how we can be allies. What does allyship mean? How do we take our privilege and make sure that we are there to support you in ways that we've failed over generations?
I was going to say that my friend and brother Michael Curry said something very powerful recently in a post on Facebook. He said, there are lots of people who became woke after last year's horrendous murder of George Floyd, but we need more insomniacs. We don't need people who are just woke. Just like we don't need people to just be non-racist. We need them to be anti-racist advocates, allies, and accomplices, which means you see something, you say something, you stand up, you speak up, and you take action. That's what being an ally and a good ally. And their allyship, I believe, comes in different forms. There is intra racial allyship. We did a panel, Get Konnected, with the Asian community about how do BIPOC individuals support each other, which is intra allyship. And then there is inter allyship, which is how do whites outside support BIPOC individuals? If you are a Christian, how do you stand up for Jews? If you're a Muslim, how do you stand up for a Jewish person and vice versa? That's what allyship is about. It's about walking in somebody's shoes and being in their skin and imagining what it's like to be an elderly Asian woman going out of your house and not knowing if somebody maliciously is going to come by and slap you over, or worse still, kill you. That's what allyship is.
And to pick up on that in terms of businesses, I know we have a lot of business people in the room. Someone once described DEI to me. Diversity is having BIPOC people in the room at a meeting. Inclusion is asking them to talk, asking them to speak, finding out what their thoughts are. Equity is allowing them to set the agenda and run the meeting. And that's really what we're talking about. It's more than just having people in the room. I serve I'm vice chair of the board of the partnership. And one thing that we see again and again, the businesses have the best intentions. Let's get that person of color in here and put them in this job. And then it's leave it. And then it's leave them. And then what ends up happening is, despite the expense and working hard to get those people in those jobs, after a year they leave, because they find either one, they haven't found a community that their family can connect with. Perhaps they have no other allies that really they feel comfortable with. Sort of the culture of the company really hasn't been explained to them. So there's an onboarding process that needs to happen, and there's an ongoing mentorship that needs to happen. Because if these people are coming from completely different communities, completely different geographic areas, you know, completely different, then it's not helpful to them to just plop them in your company and then hope for the best. It really has to be an ongoing way of making sure that they're welcome, that they have been onboarded, that they understand everything that's expected of them and of the company and all of the above, as you would do for, you know, a family member who's coming into your company. And you know, it's interesting because, you know, so I have so many friends who work hard on allyship in the company, of making sure that there's, you know, DEI and everything is working, and that people are diverse and all of the above, and all the ways I mentioned DEI. And they work hard in their communities, and they work hard on, you know, on diversifying leadership in every organization they're involved with. But then when you look at their dining room tables, and this, Deval Patrick once said this to me on a panel that I was moderating, it's all about who's sitting down at your dining room table. If you're not really looking around your house and looking around your dining room table and seeing people who are diverse from you, in my case would be, if I only have Chinese people at my dinner table, you know, how you know, what am I doing? How am I really trying to be part of the community? So it starts at home, really, and it starts with an attitude of being curious and wanting to know more and to learn more. One thing is, you know, people are always trying to get me to represent, you know, Chinese Americans and AAPI. I wouldn't presume. I wouldn't presume to even represent anyone in my family, myself. But, you know, I think it's important that we learn. We have to learn more. We have to have, you know, programs in our companies, watching documentaries, you know, it's certainly GBH. We have tons on our website that you can watch, reading books, but just really being, and it's an ongoing learning process, as Michael said. It's not, you know, one and done. It's not a woke. It's an opportunity to really learn constantly and share what we learn with others.
And maybe if I could chime in real quick, you know, it's interesting. I think about a few things come to mind. One, to your question, Greg, I think about the line from the movie The Help. And the classic line from the movie The Help is, courage will not skip this generation. Courage will not skip this generation. So I think about James Reeb, the white Unitarian Universalist minister who left Boston and answered Dr. King's call to come to Selma, Alabama, and was murdered on that march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in the days leading up to the Edmund Pettus Bridge march. I think about Mary White Ovington, the white woman who read the article in 1908 about the race war in Springfield, Illinois, that a white man, William English Walling, wrote about the massacre of Black men and women in the birthplace of Abraham Lincoln. And those two answered the call and created what we now know as the NAACP. You may not have known the NAACP was created by white citizens, along with Ida B. Wells and William and W.B. Du Bois. Our history is full of courageous citizens who had a moral compass, a social justice compass. It's not your gut, because your gut will get you to do some dumb things. We're talking about a compass. A compass is adjusted by reading, by listening, by learning. And I would say for all those that are listening today, you have to adjust your compass. Allyship and showing up means that you need to know history. So then you don't say, Colette, that dumb thing folks say, well, I want qualified people every time they talk about Black folks. And I always, or any other people of color, but I always say that when they say that, I say, well, have you ever hired a white person who wasn't qualified? And all of a sudden their heads go down. Because of course they've hired people who didn't fit to the T, that job description, but they said, I see something in her. I see something in him that reminds me of myself, or I know his father or his uncle, and I can train them, as Maurice Wright used to say, who worked for Deval Patrick, Governor Patrick. He said, I want them to be qualifiable, not qualified. I want them to be somebody who's malleable, I can teach and train. And I say that to say this conversation. You have a challenge, right? You have to adjust your compass. And then every decision you make, where you put your kids in school, as was said, where they sit at who sits at your table, where you go and spend your dollars, who you hire, who you promote, how you compensate. who you engage as supplier diversity, all of that is implicated in this whole conversation around allyship. And the test is you have to do that work. You have to do that research, and then you have to apply it to your life. And that's the challenge. One last thing on that is we use this term of good trouble from John Lewis. I just want to lift this up for folks like our guests on this call to the other panelists. Good trouble comes with risk. Speaking up means you could be relegated to bad assignments. It could mean you could lose your job. It could mean that people don't invite you to the next meeting. It could mean that you're typecasted or stereotype as the revolutionary, the militant in the room. So know that this assignment that you're getting on this call today, these women on this call have endured that challenge, right? They've been called those things. They've been pushed back on. We're asking more people to be disruptive like that. And that doesn't sit right with some people. So allyship means to me being disruptive, and history will reflect kindly back on you that you said the right thing and you did the right thing at a time when other people wouldn't do it.
So Melissa writes in the comments here to help us understand the difference between allyship, being an accomplice, and being a co-conspirator. Are we all talking about the same thing here, or is there a difference between being an ally, an accomplice, and a co-conspirator?
So
Oh, go ahead.
of course.
Eneida, go ahead.
My pleasure, of course. So first, I'd love to echo what my co-presenters just stated, because it is so important to highlight the fact that that maybe this won't be easy at times, right? Because there will be pushback. I mean, there's a collective feeling in some circles that it's okay to act a certain way. And the reality is, I mean, let's just understand that all of us, we all come with inherent biases, no matter our skin color. So this is not limited to white, black, brown, anything, right? We all have inherent biases. And I know that Greg will be sharing some resources that will help all of us understand how to work with our own biases and understand and be introspective, right? Before we are outward, we want to be inward, and we want to understand like where our thoughts, our feelings are, and our actions are coming from. And so it's to address the question from Melissa, I will say that ally is a more neutral term, and I'm sure my colleagues will also chime in and offer their perspective. So and then when I hear the word accomplice and co-conspirator, it's kind of like, okay, kind of like a little bit more mischievous. Let's we have a plan, and let's implement that plan, right? And allyship probably would happen when you're not in the room, right? Like you don't need to be there. You're a champion for the community, and the people that you are quote unquote defending don't necessarily need to be in the room when you're serving as that ally. And the last comment I'll make on this is that this is, as Michael and I know Liz and Colette also said this, when I think of how we manage our own biases and how we become allies or accomplices or co-conspirators to a community that has been historically disadvantaged, this is something that is continuous. And it's I associate it to the continuous improvement theory in business. And in the 80s, it was called total quality management, but now it's the modern term is continuous improvement. So internally and externally, we're always going to seek and look for ways to improve and to be better and to in reality, in the end, is leave a legacy, right? Because Michael, you hit the nail. History will look kind upon the people that stood up and did the right thing when they saw injustices.
So I think my privilege allows me to decide or gives me the ability to be a part-time ally. I can decide which hours I want to be, but I'd still like to get into this, is even just being an ally enough? Do I need to be more? Do white folks need to do more? What is an accomplice? What is the difference between accomplice, ally, and co-conspirator? Anybody else?
I will say that to be an accomplice, I think that Eneida hit the nail on the head. It's like being a sponsor. and we are talking to business people. And when you look around in your C-suites, you need to think about does your C-suite really reflect your consumer marketplace? Is it diverse? Is it inclusive? And being an accomplice is like being a sponsor. The person does not have to be in the room. I'm going to give you a story about Ursula Burns, who became the first Black woman to head up a Fortune 500. She was the head of Xerox. And her mentor and sponsor was a white Republican conservative guy who saw something in her, which is something that Michael made reference to. And he actually, the way they met was she was being a disruptor and challenged him in a public setting. And he invited her for lunch, and he kind of was not scolding her, but coaching her about the next time she disagrees, that there is a way she could do it that doesn't appear to be confrontational, because it would give people the wrong impression, but they can differ. And he actually invited her to come work for him and to be his special executive. And she was like, I'm an engineer. In her head, why do I want to do this? But what he wanted her to do is to be able to interact with the other C-suiters who were white, so that they could begin to formulate a relationship with her. And that is how she was able to work her way up in Xerox to become the CEO. So that is an accomplice. He made the commitment that he was going to help this woman, and he made the changes and accommodate her. That is what CEOs, C-suite executives can do as you look out into your company. Look for the people that you can bring along, to mentor them, to support them, to move them along. An ally is someone who says, I may not look like you, but I will stand with you. I may not be you, but I am you, because you are a human being. I respect your humanity, and I am willing to speak up when I see people saying or doing things that are offensive to you or your social group. That's what a good ally does. And so that's how I define allyship and accomplice, to being an accomplice.
Thank you, Colette. Liz, you work in a place where there's a large number of employees. I mean, our largest employer here on the call. And how can we be good employers and colleagues to BIPOC populations? You know, how do we make our workplaces more welcoming and more inclusive?
Sorry, we've just hired our first chief diversity officer to sort of help drive that process. And I think that, but that's not the be all and end all. We have ongoing courses every month that are mandatory, essentially, that are one on the historical courses. They're about, the history of various BIPOC communities. We also have ongoing seminars and courses on our own implicit bias, as I think Colette said, that we all, or Eneida said, we all have bias. We just have to know what it is. And that, to be able to be a real ally, it means it's a daily fight. It's not something that's one and done. It's not something that, oh, I need to think about this. And part of what we have as a goal for all of us, we all have goals that we have to work for, but one of those goals has to be how we're going to make a difference in terms of DEI. We also encourage and have many, many organizations within affinity organizations within GBH. There are at least 2 to 3 DEI groups. There's one official DEI council for all of GBH. There's also a Catalyst group that is specifically Nova and that group, and especially in the science and biotech area. And then there are other groups that we encourage and we give voice to, and we allow them to, and not allow them, but we encourage them to address folks on all these different subjects. And we have something unique, which I run, which is World Channel, which is a national channel. It's all nonfiction. We air the best in PBS nonfiction programming, everything from certainly Ken Burns and Finding Your Roots with Skip, and also Stanley Nelson films and all of the above. But we also focus on original content by and for communities of difference. And when I say difference, I mean all the differences that make a difference. And so that there's always suggested every month, there's suggested readings, there's suggested blogs to pay attention to. And there are a ton of films and documentaries that we put out there. In May alone, we have 40 films on AAPI communities. And it's really to combat that myth that we're a monolith. We're actually we can originate from 20 different nations with unique geographies, languages, cultures, and all of the above. And to be able to learn about these and understand the differences is so important. And that's what we try to do, not only within GBH, but then what we export to outside of GBH and to the rest of the country.
So that works for a large company that can hire a diversity officer and do that. Anybody here help me understand what our small and mid-sized employers can do who can't possibly think about that kind of hiring and do want to be transformative?
If I could, and so one, I just want to follow Liz and credit GBH. So funny, it's important in this work to be able to give voice to communities, to give voice to different perspectives, and GBH is a leader in that regard. And I want to say we can all do that. GBH is doing it within that, its industry, within that area of the media, but we all have an ability to give voice and perspective and share perspectives of other communities. It can be your employees, right? How you do that through programming, through Women's History Month, Black History Month, highlighting your Latinx populations or your Asian Pacific Islander populations, not just during those relegated or delegated months, but throughout the year, and not just about food, by the way. It should be about history. It should be about culture. It should be about education. It should be about opportunity, internships. Like, how are you doing these things in a way that is truly an inclusive environment? I think to your question, Greg, we're a smaller organization that I just became the CEO of in January. We don't necessarily have the resources to hire a DEI officer for the organization. And as Colette knows, I've been a DEI person in advocating that organizations hire DEI. I know that in my role, I'm going to ingrain and embed that in the organization's culture, but I know that I'm not going to always be there one day. So I also have to make sure I'm creating something that outlives me as the CEO of that organization. I say that to say this. You got to be able to put people in the right places. It has to be part of your evaluations. It has to be part of your overall culture. And then you can use consultants. There are some great people, I lean on Colette, many of us lean on Colette and others in the field that you bring in to give you some. Greg Almeida is another one, Global View Communications. I call on him regularly to say, hey, I need perspective. I need to know what we need to do in this moment. And there's a wealth of talent. Now I'm going to say this, Colette, everybody and their mother has become DEI experts and their fathers since George Floyd. They came out of the woodworks. But there are some real DEI people who do this with a mission and with values and with expertise. Lean on them if you can't hire someone internally.
And I would also say, to add to that the YW of Boston, they have a great series of programs and forums. Their Lead Boston program is a really good program to get into, where you can get rooted in better understanding the whole aspect of equity and inclusion. And recognize that one of the things that a number of smaller business have been doing, and I have been called by them to do that, is to have what I call a series of courageous conversations and recognizing that race, equity, inclusion, diversity is never an easy topic because people get a little, kind of antsy around it. But you have to remember that in order to affect change, we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because life, I believe, begins at the end of your comfort zone. When you get to the end of your comfort zone, then you start to really ask yourself those questions. Why am I feeling this way? What is it about this situation that makes me uncomfortable? And you have to be willing to hold up a mirror. I think I wrote a piece the Boston Magazine asked me to do in June or July after the George Floyd event. And I said 7 steps to becoming an anti-racist advocate. And one of the first things I said is that you have to do what I call self-evaluation. You got to hold the mirror up to yourself first. And it's the same thing with companies. What are we not doing? Can we be more inclusive? And if we don't have the budget to hire a full-fledged person, what are some of the other things that we can put in place to begin to address those issues?
So those are good things that leaders need to do and managers need to do. I'd love to talk a little bit about what colleagues and coworkers do. And the question that someone submitted was, what's the conversation that I should have with a person of color at the day after the latest horrific hate crime? And of course, there's a new one every day. But what should I say? Wow, I'm really. Are you troubled by the fact that these women were all slain in the massage parlor? Or should I wait for you to bring it up? Or what do I do to be a good coworker and colleague to a person of color in my office?
That's an excellent question, Greg. And I would say that it all starts with being curious and having empathy and just listening to the stories, right? Because everybody has a story and stories are powerful. And one of the questions in the chat that I saw has to do perhaps with a person who doesn't have the C-suite power, but is somebody who wants to do good and who wants to be able to support and help their colleagues and provide information that is supportive of disadvantaged groups. And so I would say, just learn about the stories, hear out the people that are, that have experienced certain trauma, and, and with their permission, share those stories so that others learn about the disadvantages, and that those stories can actually put a face to the issues, right? Because if we speak about issues at a very high level and in terms of thoughts and ideas, we can do that, right? But then you don't tie it into actual people's experiences, right? And so when you are able to say, well, listen, actually I had the opportunity to speak to this Black gentleman, and he told me this story. I mean, what Michael said at the beginning, right? How when he stepped into an elevator, he had to think about not appearing like a threat, right? And that is something that would never cross some other people's minds. And so that immediately makes you think and kind of puts you in that person's shoes to start evaluating the situation and perhaps gain more empathy with for the situations that people that maybe don't look like you, that because of their skin color, because of the way they sound, or because of their name, maybe are looked in a different way. There was another question that I'd love to also address, and it is somebody who asked about white people who are who grew up poor and obviously maybe lived through traumatic experiences because of their history, who would never acknowledge that they have any sort of privilege. And I would bring that back to the initial point that we made about privilege here not being referred to your socioeconomic status, but rather to the physical way you look and how the your appearance or your name or your accent hasn't impacted your ability to walk the street and not be killed or not be threatened by those around you. But again, it's it's a lot of work. It's not easy, right? There's people who are going to resist. So again, it's an ongoing process, and it's a lot of education and a lot of patience, really.
And maybe, and Native made me think about something I think is important in this conversation, which is we can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? Is we can talk about race and the implications or the impacts of racism in our organizations. We can talk about sexism. We can talk about what it is to be poor, which is not necessarily a racial thing, but poor white people and rural people. I think we often get ourselves tied up thinking that they can't all be true, right? They all deserve a different conversation. They all deserve a different response and strategy to address those issues. But I think we get very positional sometimes. So I was poor too. Well, I didn't have it easy either. But it doesn't mean that you had the experiences of being a Black man in a community like Southside Chicago or Roxbury, Massachusetts, Roxbury in Boston. It doesn't mean that you've had teachers think that you weren't smart because you were Black. So they talk down you. If anyone's ever seen the Jane Elliott experiments with eye color, right? The teacher who, the self-fulfilling prophecy, I talk to you as if you're not smart. And then that makes you not smart. You start fulfilling those things because you're drawn in by the way that they're teaching you. That could happen in a workplace, right? I don't think you can do the assignment, so I'm going to give you easy assignments or overly difficult assignments to make that true. Or I'm just going to hold you to a different expectation. I say all of that to say that this stuff is real complicated. If we can get out of our own way, of our own internalized, like, what about me? And I want to do that as a man. I want to say, okay, I have my own experiences as a Black man, but I can put that aside for a conversation about women and allow myself to not be caught up in my own challenges as a Black man, to then be part of a conversation that tells me what I need to do as a man to deal with sexism in our society.
That's right.
We got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Otherwise, we'll never deal with these issues.
So
Right.
Michael, but let me just go to that question though. If I'm riding with you in an elevator or I'm sitting with you at the water cooler and there's a terrible news thing that happened, do I bring it up to you or do I feel, oh, I shouldn't really bring it up. He's a Black guy and therefore that's the only reason I'm asking this question or asking his opinion. Help me understand whether I should feel comfortable doing that or think that I'm, pigeonholing you doing that.
What's so funny, Greg, is I'm going to tell you, like I told when I was invited, Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry invited me to speak to their entire delegation across Massachusetts. And they asked a similar question. And I said, no one can give you the answer to that because what you may say to Colette may not bother her, but it may piss me off.
Right.
Right? Because we all have our individual sensitivities. But
Right.
what I'm asking you to do and other allies, accomplices, because co-conspirators to do, is to take the risk and be willing to fumble for all those football fans out there, right? Just, you got to grab the ball and be willing to fumble it sometimes. And if you say to me, hey, that what happened on June 6th or January 6th was disturbing, if that was Black people would have handled it, it would have happened differently. I will receive that and say, wow, you're validating what I felt and what I saw that day. Thank you. And someone else who's maybe at a different place in their consciousness, or that maybe they're not comfortable with race, they could be Black or Asian or Latinx or other or Native American, they may be offended by that because they're not ready for that conversation. So you got to be ready for whatever comes, but know that you're doing it with authenticity, with empathy, and with a willingness to be an ally, and just let that be where you sit, no matter how it plays out.
Chris, I'd love to know what you think about that.
Sorry.
Go ahead, and then we'll go to.
I was going to say that one of the things that white allies can do is something that Eleanor White, who lives in Newton and is a Newton resident and a friend, always says to me, she says, Colette, you have permission to pull my shirt tail if you see me saying or doing something that you find offensive as a person of color, or let me know. And so it's about taking the risk again. It's about saying to your BIPOC friends, your colleagues, the people that you work with, look, I'm not going to get this right. I haven't walked in your shoes. I don't know what some of the feelings and experiences you have had. So please know that when I'm coming to ask you something, it's not because I am just being totally an ignorant person. I want you to help me become more empathic and better understand some of these issues that I am woefully not aware of or comfortable with, but I'm asking for your help. I think most people of color would receive that in a very positive way, because we are very seldom asked by colleagues and other people, how can I really step up and be helpful, or give us permission to say, you said, like a friend of mine said to me, when I see you, Colette, I don't see race. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't see race? What you are saying to me is when you see me, you don't see my color? Really? I said, when I see you, I see your color. You're white. So I know what the person meant. She's saying that I see the fullness of who you are in your humanity and being a human being. So I said, don't say that, because what you're saying, you're invalidating me by telling me you don't see my skin color. I want you to see my skin color, and I want you to say, I see you. I see the wholeness of you. I don't want people to tolerate me, because you tolerate pain. I want people to respect me, to accept me, and to be willing to acknowledge my humanity.
I couldn't agree more with my fellow panelists. I think that to a large degree, it's that I think we're all saying the same thing. It's a spirit and the that desire to share, the desire to be truthful, and the desire to be humble, really, that in approaching someone, because there's so many people who've said to me, I'm just exhausted, because everybody wants to know what I'm thinking. And if I say another thing to another person about this and they don't quite understand, I have to explain. I'm just exhausted. So I think that a lot of it is being willing to listen and being willing to sort of say, how are you doing on this? I know that this has just happened, and how are you feeling about this and doing about this? Because I want to know, and so it's not you expecting someone to be your own private tutorial on everything having to do with historical fact. It's more, how are you doing as a person and as a friend and as someone I respect? And then, as Colette says, how you can do more. And before, because I know we're getting close on time, but one point that I know all our panelists talked about before this is how going with DEI in one's work and is really good business. There are many statistics that I know that Greg and team shared ahead of time, that those businesses that have diversity from the mailroom, if people still have mailrooms, to the C-suite, you just are a better business. And there are many studies out there that show that diversity is good business. And there's one study, and I think it's out of Harvard. Colette, I know you know about this one. Yeah. And they had a problem. And one group was a group of 10 kind of Ivy League young 20-something white men who were tasked with this problem, how to solve this problem. And it was something about a product being brought to market. And then they had another group, a second group of 10 people who were wildly diverse, different religious, ethnic, culture, racial groups, ages, all of the above. And when they went back to the two groups, the first group had a brilliant answer on how to solve this, but it was one answer. It was one brilliant way to solve this, how to get this product out to market. The group of 10 had 10 different answers that were all brilliant, based on the market, based on who they were marketing to, what group, if they were young or old or affluent or not. And that's what we're about in terms of business, of being able, and especially now that Boston has been a majority diversity city for 15 almost 20 years. And Greater Boston's becoming more and more like that. And certainly, Newton Needham, that's becoming that way. The people who are going to be taking on your product, about your consumers, are more diverse than ever. And when we consider the fact that Greater Boston, we have more colleges here than we're a mecca for education, that we're attracting the best and the brightest from all around the world. And they're going to want to settle here, and they're going to want to be in a community that speaks to them, that has housing, that has products, that has interests that speak to them, because we all want to see ourselves in our communities. And so having people of diversity on your team, helping to figure out what's going on in the community, will only be great business for you.
Liz, thanks for going there. I have one more general question that I want to ask everybody related to that, which is about corporate allies. And I'd love to know what people think of all these corporations who've stood up against election suppression laws. We had corporations said they wouldn't give to the members of Congress who voted against certifying the election. That seems like a sea tide of change. I'd love to know what you make of it. Is it genuine? Is it marketing? Is it, what do we make of the corporations standing up, and what's real and what feels maybe contrived?
Maybe and Colette and Liz and Eneida, I'm sure, have a lot of experience and have been thinking about this. I tend to think of it as, and we've been here before, there have been other incidents where people have made statements, and too often these fall along party lines, which is disturbing, that we look at racism as a party issue, right? I want to see more Republicans, conservatives take a stand against racism and not feel like it's a Democratic Party thing. First, that's disturbing for me. That shows how divided we are as a nation. And the recent polls bear that out too, that we tend to view racism differently by party, by race, and by gender. That being said, I think that we need more statements. It's all about when those athletes in the Summer Olympics put their black fists up in the air, John Carlos and his colleague, when they put that fist up, they took a risk and they paid for it, right? It led to less support for them as athletes and endorsements. When LeBron James and Serena Williams did their statements, and quite frankly, Michael Jordan didn't over the years, they paid a price for it, right? I think companies have to be willing to pay a price. And that price is, again, as we talked about, whether history reflects kindly back on the fact that you as a company lended your voice and your muscle and your product or your services to this notion that we're all created equal and that we all should have access to justice. And I'd assume most of them did it with good purpose. And I appreciate the statement, but it has to be backed up by action, right? Because now it's about who you vote for, what policies you put in place, what policies you put money behind advocating for. We have a country where companies put billions of dollars behind candidates, parties, and issues. So I like a statement, but a statement is hollow for me if it isn't followed by action. So that's really the next step.
Colette, what do you make of Coca-Cola and Delta and all these giant corporations suddenly standing up in a way that I don't think we've seen before?
Well, I think that I give lots of credit to their employees of color, who I know a lot of employees have really come at the leadership in their companies, as well as consumers. If your consumers are being impacted and your employees cannot be their authentic self, they're under threat, then as a company, you have an obligation, a responsibility to really stand up and support your employees. If you are not willing to at least do that, then, don't be surprised when your company starts taking a tumble in its stocks, because today's environment, when you think about it, a lot of the people who were out there marching during Black Lives Matter protests were white people. Who said, enough is enough. We are going to go out there. And they are now using the power of their purse to say, we are going to support companies that take responsible, motions and do the right thing to empower and support people of color, and to also stand up against what I call draconian laws and rules and policies. So I applaud consumers and I applaud employees for really moving their employers and company CEOs to do the right thing.
Terrific. We have 4 minutes left. That means you can each have a minute to just give me any last thoughts, things we haven't gotten to yet. And I'll start with you, Liz.
Well, just to sort of pick on the company aspect, after all, these companies are run by human beings. They're run
That's
by
right.
people. And I like to think that, this awakening across America is a very personal experience for many people, because at the end of the day, it's not just the legacy of your company.
Mhm.
It's about your personal legacy of being able to tell your children and your grandchildren that when the time came and it was not obvious, but when the time came, you stood up and you said something and you stood up for somebody else. So at the end of the day, that's what I'm hoping is happening, because I'm an ever the optimist. But when you look at the results of people pulling out, organized sports from Atlanta and other things, it can only open up people's eyes that the world is watching. And, one's personal legacy should be matching one's company's legacy.
Liz, thank you. I know you have to go, so thank you very much. Eneida, we'd love to hear from you.
Of course. Thank you, Greg. So I'm going to take my time to answer a question that was in the question and answer section. And it has to do with, Black men and women saying that there's no systemic racism. So how, the question is, how do you address a person of color who essentially negates the reality that we're discussing here? And interestingly enough, that Senator Tim Scott actually said publicly on live television right after President Biden's address. So the way that I view this is that, we've all talked about this a little bit here in different ways. And it's that we need to educate ourselves and we need to understand what the history is in order to be able to talk about it, right? And so, very big picture, a very easy answer would be, I understand perhaps you haven't faced this, you don't feel this way. I'm not saying that you lived this experience, but when you look at the rooms where it happens, in the words of Hamilton, right? You don't see a lot of people of color. You only see people that look the same. So that tells me right there that there is an issue with the system that is not allowing diverse people to come into rooms and into positions of power and influence and into decision-making roles. So maybe you are not telling them that that they experience that, because you cannot say what they lived, but you could definitely say that your perception of the environment is very different than the experience that they're describing that they have lived, because the reality is that the majority of people do understand that there is a system that needs to be addressed, and we need to talk about it to deal with those, like Colette stated, those rules and those laws that have placed barriers to success for a lot of people of color in America.
Thank you very much. Michael, last thoughts?
I'll end it on this. I use the analogy of the little kid in the movie Sixth Sense. And you remember the classic line from the Bruce Willis movie is, I see dead people. And racism and equity and justice is just like those dead people. Is you can pretend you don't see it, you can ignore it. You can be Black, you can be Latinx, you can be Asian, and you can be white, and you can pretend you don't see it. But when you decide to see it, just like the little boy, it comes with a responsibility, because now you have to do something about it. So what we're asking you to do is we're asking you to see dead people on the elevator, in the train, in the conference room, when the police are engaging someone on the street corner, and it comes with tremendous responsibility and risk. But we need you to do it. We need you to be an ally. We need you to show up, not just for Black and brown folks, but for your own children as Liz said, you need to do it for your own personal legacy, that you were here and courage didn't skip this generation.
Thank you very much. Colette, I will leave you with the last word.
Well, first of all, I second what Michael just said to you in the chat, that I applaud the chamber, the Newton Needham Chamber, for really addressing what I consider to be these courageous conversations, and in giving the corporate community and your members in the western suburb of Boston the opportunity to really be open, to listen. I said there are the 3 L's: look, listen, and learn, because that's how we grow. And hopefully this conversation this afternoon was enlightening, insightful, and inspirational, and will help you move the dial in creating greater equity, greater inclusion, and greater diversity within your company and your community and your town, your home, your family, you know?
Thank you all. It really was an honor. And I think I can speak for the people in the audience too. A great privilege to be able to hear from all of you. So thank you so much. Thanks for everybody for joining us and spending your lunch hour with us. We're really grateful. Have a great weekend, everybody. And again, thanks for everybody's time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.